Hello, everyone. So welcome to Digital CitizenCon 2951. So it's really, really good to be back in front of the camera and talking to all of you out there. I wish it was in person. As you know, we have been doing CitizenCons for a long time, and last year was the last year we didn't do it because of the pandemic. And we didn't want to go another year without having a CitizenCon, but we felt like this year it was a bit too close to get back to do it in person with all the issues with travel, and we're doing it virtually and digital this year. And I'm hoping next year we'll get to do it in person. So it's been very challenging for all of us. There's about 720 of us have all been working from home. But a silver lining to that cloud, which is a lot more of you have had more time to play Star Citizen and give us feedback and get engaged. I mean, we, compared to where we were in the last time we had a physical CitizenCon in 2019, the number of daily players that we have in Star Citizen is on average 2 to 3 times more than we had back in 2019, which is fantastic. 2020 was a big year of expansion for us. 21 is also been incredibly great. And we're hoping with some of the features that we're working on, like server meshing, we're working on a bunch of optimizations, quality of life, and maturing some of the gameplay loops that you're starting to see happen. I mean, we've got some stuff coming up like Death of a Spaceman, where the first part of it, the medical gameplay, is going to be there, and also the beginning of physical inventory with the personal inventory. It's not fully finished yet. Those are 2 major game changers that are coming very shortly. In fact, they're coming with 3.15, and there's a lot of other things that are just beyond that. And we're going to continue that momentum, and more and more people will be discovering Star Citizen, and more of you will be spending more hours playing it and having fun, giving us great feedback, and we're inevitably inching towards the finish line of having something that we can say, yep, this is the definitive experience for you guys. And so I'm really excited by that. But let's get back to today. And today is about Digital CitizenCon, and we've got some really great stuff to show you. The first of that is going to be led off by Todd Pappy with Ian Leland and David Haddock. And I don't want to spoil it. There's some really great stuff. It's going to use a combination of some features that are coming very soon and some features and content that is a little further down the road. But it's going to give you a taste of life to come in the Star Citizen universe. So without further ado, let me pass it to them.
Hi, I'm Todd Pappy, Star Citizen Live Game Director.
Hi, I'm Ian. I'm the Art Director for Star Citizen.
Hi, I'm Dave. I'm the Narrative Director at Star Citizen.
So finally, we're saying goodbye to Stanton. It's quite precious to us. We've been talking about it. We've been looking at it. We've been living there for quite a long time. Now it's time to, move the conversation on, start to look at something new. Mm-hmm. Now it's changed slightly, the jump point side, from what we saw a little while ago. One of the things that was quite important for Chris is he wanted that feeling of something that was quite wondrous, something that was quite amazing. It's not dark, it's not mysterious, it's not hostile, but it's more, like I said, wondrous.
So when we started looking at Pyro, and we had to start looking at how the jump points work when we're traveling from Stanton to Pyro or Pyro to Stanton, and thinking about border security, the infrastructure that's needed there. What's the lore? Just because on one side it's very lawless versus the other side is dealing with the UEE. So we needed to go through and really think about how this was working, and then also with the jump points, how smugglers would work with the secondary and tertiary routes that would lead into the main jump point and then funnel out.
Yeah, we kind of call it, internally, we kind of call it the Swiss cheese approach. Mm-hmm. Of the, there's sort of the main entrance that you would go through on Stanton, which would be this sort of guarded, have the infrastructure that you had mentioned, the security and stuff like that, but the possibility that there would be alternate ways to kind of get in to bypass that, so which would be beneficial knowledge for smugglers or criminals who are trying to get in under the radar. Yeah. And also it was if there's a lot of infrastructure around it, it sort of created this impression that that infrastructure was responsible for the jump point. In reality, it's a naturally occurring thing. An interesting balance of make it seem like this is a checkpoint, but at the same time it's something that the ships are creating, not the structures.
So before we go too much further into the Pyro system, let's take a deep dive into the op process with Jake Dunlap, and he's going to be taking us through the authoring process for the Stanton and Pyro jump points.
Bringing jump points to the verse has been an interesting journey as we've been designing a new element in our game. We've put a lot of time into creating two solid examples of different types of jump points you'll eventually see all around the verse, one in Stanton and one in Pyro. We've been continuing to use Houdini as the tool to create these gas clouds. The setup we have for them is a parent gas cloud and a child gas cloud. The parent is mainly used as an establishing shot when you arrive in your ship from quantum travel, while the child is used as the main gameplay environment and is placed inside the parent. The child also has a reasonable scale, which keeps your average ship speed in mind. These things aren't nearly the size of real nebula, if you're curious. But by no means are the jump points small. Here's an example of a Pyro jump point next to Microtech. To explain the process a bit more, we create the parent at a large scale, then cut out a small box in the center of it. Inside the small box, we'll gather the volume data from the parent, up-res that, and then add details. The details will be different depending on what type of gas cloud you want and if you want to easily fly through it or not. We usually spend time investigating different designs for the gas clouds, but with the Stanton jump point, the work had already been started and used in the 2019 CitizenCon demo. We just had to go through, clean up the Houdini file and get it game ready with a couple of extra tweaks along the way. Some of the tweaks we made to the parent were making it feel like more of a structurally sound rotating disk. This was to make it feel like a safe and well-used jump point. The child gas cloud here was changed more dramatically. It used to have a bunch of dark clouds around it. We felt that it was feeling a little bit too closed in, so we spent time morphing the magnetic lines in the center to create a really interesting horizontal, flowing, relaxing composition to visually show you that Stanton itself is generally a safe place at first glance. The parent gas cloud for Pyro was created with the same process as the Stanton parent, but we changed the shape of the cloud into something more menacing and violent. We wanted the reveal of Pyro to be a clear warning of what you should be expecting throughout the entire system. So we made it very closed in, dense, and very active. We did make it a small challenge to traverse the child, something that won't take too long but should be something to consider when traveling through. Something that helped really quickly create a fun traversal route was creating a white box play area in engine out of solid geometry and flying around it right away. After we were happy with the route, we exported the geometry to use in Houdini, where we converted it to a volume and combined it with the up-resed area of the parent to export that out as the child cloud. We wanted to make sure that these systems feel very different from each other. Some ways in which we did this was by the shape of the jump points. As I had mentioned before, Stanton feels very clean, put together, and generally safe with the disc-like form that it has, but Pyro feels like it's more violent, distressed, and this shows in its form. The comparison is shown well in both of the child clouds. In the Stanton child cloud, we have nice long strands of the magnetic waves that encapsulate the jump point that feel harmonious, beautiful, and free, whereas in the Pyro cloud, it shows almost the opposite. The walls feel like they're closing in on you, moving in unpredictable ways, completely unstable. Your ship could enter into a wall and disappear within a second. Lighting also plays a big role in how we feel about these spaces. You can see these are dramatically different areas in the mood and tone, and lighting is the key to that. So that's a brief look at jump points. They've evolved quite a bit since last time you saw them. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Thanks, Jake. So one of the things that players will first probably come across when they come into the Pyro system is the space station. You know, it was discovered a long time ago. It was sort of deemed uninhabitable because it was just too dangerous with that variable flare star going on. So they kind of utilized the system for resources, and then when they kind of tapped out, they just sort of left, and that's when all the sort of squatters came in. So there's sort of older infrastructure built to sustain kind of the mining activities and the gas harvesting and stuff like that, but you know, they just basically left, and then other populations started to slowly move into the system, criminals, squatters, survivors, and whatever, and start to kind of take over what was left behind.
Which gives us some unique gameplay comparatively to Stanton and the space stations there. So with Pyro, since they're in such disrepair, some of them are inhabited, some of them are completely abandoned, and then so players can go and explore. They can go and see what's happened there, whether it's been hit by an asteroid, or if it's there was some sort of conflict there before. But you'll be able to go and explore the different decks and be able to go and meet new people, meet the frontier lifestyle, enjoy it.
Okay, so before we go to the inside of the stations, we're going to jump now to Eric, and he's going to go in a bit more detail, the concept development process taken when looking at the exteriors.
Hi, I'm Eric Gagnon, Principal Concept Artist on Star Citizen. The goal of that initial step of sketch development is to create something not invited. Dangerous, damaged by asteroids, and surrounded by floating debris. Hiding place for outlaw, looks old, decrepit. Lawless, no security force here, approach at your own risk. Industrial look, messy, but not abandoned. Some parts are wrecked, but under repair and raw looking. I like to use the black and white sketches to start. It allows us to go very quickly and focus on the shape only. We then try to play with a touch of color to define more of the commercial port platform. We try different schemes to remind us of the whole look with a rusty vibe and brown tones. Adding a touch of light and some context around the sketch allows to see the scale of things and properly view the silhouette. We expand on the idea to play with the mechanism and functionality. This is the color sketches of the asteroid Hunter harpoon and at different angles. In this sketch, we can clearly feel the arrival of the asteroids and the dismantling or destruction zone. We also need some top angles to properly showcase the size and scale of it. With all those elements in place, we can now build a nice plate of the entire concept for the asteroids, harpoon with all the pieces together. The shantytown module habitation is a nice idea to add a kind of small city on the outskirts of the space station. So here I sketched those shapes to create something very modular. From the grayscale, it's pretty easy to do a color pass. I played with a color palette that reflects the vibe of shantytown. In this sketch, here we can easily see how cool the area is going to be. Another angle shot here is pretty nice too. Playing with warm and cold color contrast is interesting. All those different angles help define and expose the different elements of the concept to properly illustrate it. Now we have a nice board of this sketch phase. We apply the same process here for the commercial port platform. The black and white sketches are a good way to go. In this image, we see the silhouette shape sketches for the front of the port platform structure. A quick side view plan here is necessary to well build this design. We fill the form and the ratio and the size of what we want to achieve. And of course, we create a color sketch to see what it could be. We see the industrial look and some potential details to better define and deep dive into. For those, we have a deeper design exploration of this industrial area. Pipes, tanks, angular shapes, and a color touch. Combining 2D and 3D sketches really help properly communicate the design intent. It's a common technique now, but it's really efficient to highlight areas of the concept. Using 3D is also very useful for level designers to validate the size and shape of things when creating the environment in-game. Let's talk about the big repair machinery idea. This machine could be used to repair surfaces damaged by asteroids, inspired from the heavy machinery that we see in mining. Nice to see the overall add-on ideas brought together on a single board. It gives a great look and makes you want to see the next design step. The mood looks. We also create a mood board from our different shots. This shows how lighting is used to set the tone of the environment by giving different options and color palettes. Finally, we provide some options for paint of the exterior surfaces. We work from a list of brands and factions that we need to incorporate to the design. We started from the narrative things, worked to build the visual identity of the different brands, exploring different ways to represent them in the environment, stickers, flat surfaces, graffiti, or official paint job. This really brings the sketches alive and set in the universe of Star Citizen. The Outlaw Station are a staple of the Pyro system, and we hope this first exterior concept phase excites you as much as we had fun to create it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Looks great.
That's the exterior. So right now we're going to go from the outside and we're going to jump to the interior. Before we really started exploring anything, one of the core concepts that was discussing as a group was the idea of power and the idea of heat. Now, we've got like this big interior layout of this, maybe this old mining station. How would they have adapted the space? You know, they would have, right, okay, we need power here. Okay, that will create heat. So we started thinking about, okay, where would the heat lamps be? And then where would light come from? So just the principal concept of power, creating heat, creating light, that was pretty much the core of the start of the visual development process.
So when we started talking about it from a design side, we needed to make sure that we were covering certain shops, just basic needs for the player. Everything's bare bones. It could be that it used to be a clothing store, now it's a food shop, and so they've converted it. The gang's moved in. You know, it's not what it used to be, and but you see that old skeleton there.
One of the things that definitely we've been talking about with Pyro that we didn't really get to see in Stanton is the idea of the sort of the gang presence. So, you know, that idea that they're the sort of local law in the area. So, you know, you might see gang members coming and shaking down some of these shopkeepers for protection money or rent, you know, type thing.
Or even shaking down the player.
Yeah, which would be very fun. not for me, but.
So when we started to explore some of the side areas, there were other factors that we had to cover. Habitation, clinics, you know, players need a place to sleep, to log out, as well as players need a way to get themselves healed. And then we started taking the same treatment or similar treatment that we were doing with the main market area and started to take it into the hubs and how they were possibly repurposed, or the clinics and how those were possibly repurposed. So, and just make sure that everything felt cohesive in its raw, natural form. In the way that we have the station structured, we haven't let players go into like living quarters of where the people that lived at the station would be, or even into the lower decks where the power, where the gravity generators are. And this is where we're going to start introducing these areas, and it opens up new opportunities for the players to go explore and do new things. But it's also areas that the gang might want to protect.
Yeah, it offers a lot of possibilities for mission content, you know, whether it's actually maybe working for the gang itself or other kind of little small things you could do inside there to really kind of, drive you deep into the bowels of this thing.
Okay, so that's a little look at the insides of the stations, but now we'll jump to Christian, and Christian's going to take us on a little bit of a deeper dive into the concept development process of the inside of the stations.
Hi, my name is Christian Doratz. I'm a senior concept artist on the environment team, and we're going to look at the concept development for the space station a little bit. So first off, we looked at the heat map. So there is a lot of what I said, the electricity is gone, the heating is gone, and the breathable air, the oxygen is gone. So there is pretty much all of those connected areas. They are lifeless in a way, right? So you wouldn't settle down somewhere in between those empty corridors. We were trying to sort our thoughts and get them on paper, right? So we were exploring different ideas that we on the concept team had in mind. So we were thinking about pathways that the player and the NPC could take. So what would happen? We were thinking about what would happen if all of a sudden one pathway is blocked off, or another one will open up, right? So we were thinking about verticality and how the players or the NPCs can traverse all of those interesting areas that are, in the end, pretty ominous, right? So think about, there are some people just screwing off side panels on the wall, or they are screwing off ceiling panels, and you would see all of the maintenance areas behind it. So we'd see a lot of struts, a lot of working areas. There's cables hanging. So those were the very first sketches where we could see what those eventually could evolve into. And we also started then slowly with some loose 3D sketches. So getting everything into 3D, and it's pretty much evolved over time, where we could talk to the environment guys, and we were asking for some of the current rest stops geo and some of the textures, and then getting them into 3D, and we were just changing up all of the props, all of the side panels, or all of the whole the environment. So we could, looking back at the references, then convey this feeling. We could introduce more dirt, we could introduce some damaged panels, side panels, and pretty much explore this side area, right? And the big advantage of this is that we can make the environment how we like. So one thing that we did is like kill all the lights because we don't need lighting. We want to create our own lighting. And this is what I said earlier. The current desktops are super bright. They're family friendly. But now we want to make it ominous. We want to make it dark mood. We want to make it super dark with the players like always feeling kind of in danger, and especially with the gang members in mind, right? So this would allow us to create one of the very early, or one of the earlier 3D explorations, which then lead to one of the final concept art, or the final implementation of this. So when we were at the point where we were kind of okay, or where we thought like, okay, this is an environment that we want to see, then we took care about the last 20%. So the last 20% in this case means having a final render and painting over. So we were just painting over in Photoshop and doing some more refinements for the mood and the lighting. We were painting in some of the decaling and some of the graffitis, because it is ultimately easier to do all these things in 2D than in 3D and caring about the materials. So we were able to just refine the final concept in this regard. And this wasn't a straight process from A to B. It was an iterating process. So in between, if you're looking at some of the other concepts, for example, the barriers, we were at one point thinking about what would happen if we introduce barriers that the gang members then would set up on one point. So what does that mean for you as a player? What is the player doing, or what is the player doing at this point? So will he encounter these gang members? Will he try to find a way around? Is he going to use some of the ladders or the underground vents, for example? So we were changing the concepts here and there, more or less. And this leads to, in the end, having a nice variety of concepts, or different types of concepts that we then could cherry pick the best parts of it, or in other teams, the environment team, the design team could cherry pick the best ideas from those concepts. And this was pretty much a rundown of the concept development for the Pyro space station's interior.
Thanks, Cristiano. Looked appropriately scummy.
So we've been talking a lot about the insides of the stations. We've been looking at a lot of the concept art. But now we can jump to Josh, and Josh is going to talk about one of my favorite parts of the process, and it's when we take some concepts and we start to do some ideation, some visual development in the engine.
Hi, my name's Josh Van Zulen. I'm the principal environment artist here at Cloud Imperium Games. Today, we're going to be going through the Pyro space station's visual target and pre-production sort of things that we're going to be doing for these rundown / outlaw space stations. So what I have here right in front of me now is obviously the food court from our Stanton space stations. We've just dragged the wear up on all of them. So now we're getting all of this really nice grime on all of these surfaces, right? So if I turn off my working lights, which hopefully are gonna, produce that mood that we're after. So I'll turn on that right now. So a number of things have happened right in front of us, right? You can instantly see we've got lots of heavy fog coming in. Don't pay too much attention to the particles now. I'll go into them a little bit later. We've got some light panels up here shooting through the rafters, and we've got another one over here as well, right? So we're gonna do a quick little thing here. It's adding in some cables, right? And now this is really important, not only to achieve the art direction, but it gives us a really nice level of parallax within the scene, right? We have a couple of design constraints within this space as well. One of those being we have a gang and then a general civilian population, right? Now, one of the things that we wanted to do in terms of that design in this particular space was separate it out in like a kind of class type system, right? So we're going to start to explore some of the requirements of that. One of that being that, like I mentioned before, you can't get up here unless you're in favor with the gang. So we need to put in the instruments that are going to help portray that, and that is a checkpoint, right? So, and just a side note, all of this stuff is super work in progress and nothing is final. So don't read too much into it. So from here, we're missing a few bits and pieces, right? But one of the ways that we're gonna solve that is with graffiti. All right, so I'm gonna turn on those decals now. And you can start to see that the walls here are starting to disappear a little bit. It's a very subtle effect in this particular area, but you'll start to see how much more it comes through in others, right? So moving on from here, we need to start putting the stuff in the environment. So bear with me for a sec when I turn this on. All right, so got here is a lot of stalls, right? We really want to get that cramped vibe in, like that was kind of similar in the concept, and start seeing how far we can push the limitations of what we can do in the engine, but also what we can do with our technical systems as well, right? One of the things that was immediately apparent to us is that AI is really tricky to deal with when in tight and enclosed spaces, right? So we need to look at areas like this here and this here to make sure that it's wide enough that a few AI can pass each other or a player and not, look completely gross, right? Now, I mentioned lighting before. So I'm gonna turn off the working lights that we've got so far, and you'll start to see what I mean. So we've got a whole bunch of stalls here at the moment. The entire scene is being lit by the stalls itself. This has already come a long way, and the stalls themselves have had a bit of a lighting pass, so this is already starting to look quite nice, but we're not getting, that thickness that we were getting up on the top level, right? We're not getting that little bit of life to a certain extent. And we're also getting these areas here where they just fall completely into darkness, which is not fun. So obviously, like I said before, we'd be doing lighting as we go through this process, but just to see how much of an impact that pass can do on an environment like this, we'll just turn it on for you. So you start to instantly see we've now got a lot more thickness within the environment. And if I just double check just to make sure that our lights are generating correctly, cool. So we're getting a lot more voluminous lighting now. We're getting all of these heaters coming in now, the heat shimmering off them. We've got these little portable ones lighting up the place. We've got some ones that are hanging from the roof, ones that are over in the corners and stuff like this, right? So we're starting to get a lot more mood in this. This is starting to feel really nice now. Now, what I was mentioning in terms of the rain, right? So yes, we're talking about the rain now. Why is there rain inside, right? So this is generally a really cold station. And when people are in this area that's in the center, because there's so much stuff happening here, it's starting to get warmer, right? You've got the heaters here, you've got the gang that is kind of maintaining a lot of this stuff and producing a lot of the heat themselves. This is prime real estate for where everyone wants to be, right? So what happens when you have this many people cooking food in this one small area, breathing hot air, that sort of thing, it all starts to rise in this environment, and it starts to get that massive cavern, right, that we've got up here, all the way up to the roof there. As it goes up, it starts to cool down, right? And we start to get precipitation inside, where it starts to rain. And even in many instances, we start to get a little bit of ice coming through as well. So that means once it's all fallen down here, it's actually quite wet and damp. It's still cold and a little bit warm around heaters, but it's generally quite damp because of that weird kind of event. Now, the rain as it currently sits is just a placeholder asset that we're borrowing from Squadron, and that will have to obviously be remade to suit the amount of rain that we want to have within this environment, which won't be, crazy, but it serves as a proof of concept for what we're trying to achieve, right? So that is pretty much Pyro Stations. I hope you really enjoyed seeing the breakdown that we've done here today, learning a little bit about the process of going in and doing a visual target, and just a little bit more of that earlier process and problem solving that we go through. So yeah, I hope you really enjoyed the rest of CitizenCon here today, and I'll catch you later.
Cool, thanks Josh. That was looking really good. All right, so as we continue our process of exploring the Pyro system, now I think it'd be good to look a little bit at the planets and moons that populate the system. Now, one of the things we thought it'd be interesting to talk about is how do we design a system from the ground up? As with all of this, we always start from narrative, before we put any pen to paper or we have any discussions about player experience. We always start from, the world that, Dave and others have kind of built.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's also the thing of, the Pyro, I think, was first initially conceived very early on in the process, but once we finally are tackling it from a realistic, practical, how we're going to build this, what is each planet going to look like, it's important, to ask more questions about, to flesh it out more. Because we kept it intentionally kind of vague, because we want the art team to, you guys to do what you do and the designers to do what they do.
So when we started that exploration process, we knew we had like a ballpark that we needed to stay in. So we literally thought, okay, how do we design a system? And fundamentally, it kind of comes into maybe 3 key areas. So because we're a space game, the establishing shot of that planet is very, very important, because it describes everything from, you know, continent breakup, fundamental palette. So right from the get-go, we started to sketch in ideas of what the key establishing shots were going to be like. And then from there, we jump into key art. So key art is basically on the surface, what is the mood, what's the tone that we're expecting to see. And as you're saying, like the first one we wanted to tackle was Pyro 1, because, you know, David described this wonderful picture, and it was already clear in our minds about what it wanted to look like. So we hit that first, and, you know, we wanted something hostile, we wanted something hazardous. Also, as part of this process is we knew our current tech limitations, but we also knew what we wanted to do in terms of our future tech, you know, future planet tech, weather, you know, so we kind of went crazy with ideas as we was exploring. So we went through the various planets, did some key art, and again, put them up on the board, and just to validate, we are keeping within that palette, but we're getting that diversity. We're getting that diversity of color, hue, value structure, silhouettes, composition, because even within something like Stanton, there's variety, you know. That was very important for me and the team, where you want to feel like you're on a space opera, you can travel around, but now we're going to a completely other system. So we continued that ideation process there. So we had the establishing shots, we had some key art, and then from there is we create like what we call like breakout packs. This is where, when we're talking through with design about, you know, what are the interactables that the player maybe will come across, what are the minables, what are the harvestables, and then from there we start to build out literal breakouts or almost asset packs that will go to the team. Now from there, like, we did a first pass exploration, and what we did is we put it all together on a single board for Chris to have almost like a commander's view of a new system. You know, we showed it to yourself, Dave, we showed it to Chris, we showed it to Todd, and right, you know, on one sheet, you've got the establishing shots, you've got the key art, you've got the breakout. And for me personally, that's how I like to work. I like to see that, like I said, a commander's view of an entire system. And then from there, you can kind of tweak, adjust, and, you know, mold things into what play experience we want to put forward. So that was a snapshot of the visual exploration process we use when designing a system from the ground up. Now we can take a break from us talking and go to an art video, a sizzle video created by the art team. And what this will show is, it will show a kaleidoscope of planets and moons from Pyro, and it will also showcase some of the latest and greatest art techniques and processes and tools that the art team have. Awesome. I'm fully in love with Pyro, and hopefully from seeing that video, hopefully you guys are too. So as a continuation now, we can jump to Sebastian, and Sebastian will talk to you a little bit more about the cloud authoring process and some of our latest cloud tech. Then we can jump to Maximilian. Maximilian will talk a little bit about geology creation, how we create that type of biome. And then lastly, we can go to Özlem, and Özlem will go into a lot more detail about how we take some of the concept art that we've been showing of the botanicals and how we interpret that to in-game artwork.
Hi, my name is Sebastian, and I'm a principal environment artist on the Planet content team. I'll be talking a bit about the data that's defining the visuals of the volumetric clouds and how we create it. Crusader was our first astronomical object that made use of the volumetric cloud tech that's being built by Carsten Wenzel and others. While working on Crusader, we learned a lot on what kind of data gives us which results and what is better to be avoided. With the tech being new, we also needed all new workflows for it. We are currently building more tools for producing the data, so we expect to get better, more complex results in less time in the future. We are evaluating everything from a very manual process that involves painting every pixel to a fully procedural one with little to no artist input, and we will probably end up somewhere between the two. This essentially means that what you are about to see is very likely subject to change. Due to the way the shader works, we can either throw random data at it and hope for happy accidents, or we can be very specific with the data and what kind of cloud formations come out of it in certain areas of the planet. For most use cases, there are two types of textures that need to be created. The first of which is the global property map, which determines what type of cloud is being used at any point on the planet's surface. It is also used for controlling the color placement of non-water-based clouds, but I'll get to that later. The other map is for defining the types of clouds and is named accordingly. The cloud type map allows us to control the cloud density and the impact of the two separately tiling 3D noises, which add detail and definition to what would otherwise be fairly low resolution shapes. The way the two textures interact is maybe best compared to forming a vase out of clay on a pottery wheel, and that's kind of what we're going to do now. In this video, we are revolving half the silhouette of a vase around a circular pattern, which gives us a vase-like shape in 3D space. The big difference to a pottery wheel though is that we can not only feed it data in the shape of a circle, but ultimately whatever shape we want. With the density channel, we can control how thick the clouds appear. White pixels represent very dense clouds, black pixels produce no clouds at all, and then we also have everything in between. There's always a tiny bit of impact from the tiling noises, which you can see to have an effect on the lower density regions. The shaping noise and its control texture are the most impactful in terms of turning a nicely shaded volume into something we can clearly identify as clouds. How much it gets to affect the shape of the clouds depends on the brightness in the corresponding channel of the cloud type map. By combining density and shaping noise, we can model everything from dense clouds to soft, more ethereal shapes, and everything in between. The last of the cloud type map channels controls the erosion noise. It is lower resolution than the shaping noise, since its main purpose is to add an extra layer of small detail. We usually just add it everywhere, unless we specifically want soft clouds with less definition. Black values add details in the way the tiling noise is authored, while white values invert the noise, and medium gray values mean that the noise has no impact. Maybe you can already get a feeling for the complexity of the system and how every pixel in every channel can have a dramatic effect on the end result. Another thing we can change are the tiling 3D noises themselves. By default, a cauliflower-like noise is used for the shaping to model those fluffy sheep-like cumulus clouds. But by changing it to a different 3D noise, we can produce some more abstract cloud shapes that wouldn't normally occur on Earth. This is an area, in combination with different global data, we keep investigating to produce more alien cloud formations in the future. We've been advancing this approach with Pyro 5, another gas giant, which brings me to the other use of the global property map. It has a second channel, which, in combination with a color gradient, is used to control the global color of the clouds for not so physically correct coloring of the gas giants. We sometimes have to restrain ourselves to not make brightly colored balls of cotton candy. There are a lot more settings that allow us to tweak everything from how the clouds are shaded and shadowed, over the global impact and frequency of the detail noises, to parameters that drastically change what results the textures I've shown you today produce. You'll have to bear with us as we'll figure out if there's a best combination of settings and how those might change once all the features that are still planned eventually get added. By now you've probably seen a fair amount of volumetric clouds as part of this year's CitizenCon and are quite likely to see a bunch more. Because of that, and since I'm still an artist at heart, I'll leave you with this bad drawing of a cat instead of more epic cloudscapes. Thank you for your time.
Hi, my name is Max and I'm a senior environment artist at CIG. I am part of the Planet team where my focus is on planet and asset creation. I want to give you some insight into how we transform simple terrain shapes to a final biome, plus a little preview of what you can expect in the future. When creating a new biome, we start by assigning ground textures to the terrain geometry. For this research and development desert biome, we chose a selection of different types of sand and soil. For additional depth and detail, we have the option to use displacement mapping. The next step is adding our first layer of ground cover assets. In our game, ground cover is any low-cost asset up to knee height, which does not require collision and allows us to use a lot of these assets to create a nice level of density. Here we use a mix of gravel, patches of moss, and dry grass. After that, we add slightly bigger assets in the form of clusters of desert bushes to give context to the smaller assets and add variety. We finish the object scattering pass by adding individual larger rocks and arrangements of small rocks which give the player a better understanding of how far away something is when walking, driving, or flying over a planet. For performance reasons, we use a range of settings like randomized rotation and scale values to get as much variety as possible out of the number of assets we created, to mimic a level of complexity that feels organic and comparable to what you find on Earth. Something that we have been missing on our current planets and moons are massive rock formations due to tech limitations. Some of these limitations have since been solved. For example, we are now able to render assets much further. Because of that, we recently kicked off a research and development phase during the production of the Pyro system to find workflows for the creation and distribution of cliffs. Full disclosure though, this is early in development and heavily work in progress, but we still wanted to give you a little glimpse of what to expect in the future. The challenge for us will be to figure out how we can make these assets look as good as possible from all angles. If a player walks up to them on foot, they must look just as good as when a player decides to land his ship on the highest point of a cliff. But we are excited to add an even more epic level of scale to our game. That's it for me. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of CitizenCon.
Hello, my name is Özlem and I'm part of the Organics team. Today I want to talk a bit about how we build the different biomes on Pyro 3. Pyro 3 is a planet with very distinct biomes. For example, we got the yellow moss biome that is a strong contrast to the dark volcanic regions. We have some icy areas, boulder fields, acidic fields, different coastlines, and a lot more. When working on a biome, the first thing we do is to have a look at the concept art. We do an asset breakdown for all the elements we need to recreate the scene. By doing so, we get more information about what kinds of rocks and vegetation assets we need, the proportions of the assets in relation to the character, the distribution and frequency of those assets on the planet, but also the amount of coverage per biome on the planet. We can also get information about the color palette, the terrain colors, and what to scatter on the coastlines. The last thing we can see from the concepts is the asset and ground materials. We also try to reduce the amount of the asset packs because of performance and time constraints. Instead of doing 50 unique rocks, we can achieve the same result by using just 3 with our procedural scattering system, since the assets will be scaled and rotated randomly. After figuring out all the necessary elements, we start with the whiteboxing phase. This means doing a very quick mock-up of the scene by using very simple assets. The white boxes should just represent the shape and color of the final object. We do that to see if the asset breakdown we did beforehand is working in the 3D space as well. At this stage of the process, we can still change the whole look of the scene if we don't like the outcome yet. We can say, let's make the rocks 5 times bigger, or blue instead of red, and so on. Or we realize we need to do some research on a specific asset to solve it visually, which was the case for the moss, for example. When doing R&D on the moss, we were trying different shapes and sizes, and we also had to figure out how to do the moss strands that are covering the whole mesh. To make the workflow for the moss strands a bit easier, we used Houdini to procedurally scatter them. Otherwise, it would have been too time-consuming to place every single moss strand by hand, since there are several thousands of them. After figuring out how to do the moss strand, we still didn't like the overall shape of the moss, as it was a bit too blobby and yellow. We wanted something that looked a bit more natural and integrates better into the terrain, so we created some rocks with a moss blend on top instead. We broke up the moss shape even further because it looked a little bit too molten, and we added different kinds of moss strands to get a little bit more variety. In the end, all these things got us to a result that we were satisfied with. The usual approach to setting up a biome is to start with the largest elements first and work your way to the smallest one. If we take the moss preset as an example, we would start by adding the largest elements first, then adding some smaller moss patches around it to create a nice fall off. We continued with adding some flatter grass to make it sit nicer on the terrain. But then we realized we needed something bigger to bring the elements closer together, so we decided to add some high grass as well. The final steps are adding some ground cover like small rocks or tiny moss. As you can see, while building a biome, we need to do several iterations to get the best visuals. Thank you for watching.
Thanks to Seb, Maxi, and Oslam for showing us their work. So when we started looking at outposts and started really from a ground up on how to make it so that there's more diverse gameplay in there, the player can approach it in multiple different routes. There can be combat encounters, there can be social encounters. So we needed to kind of rebuild and rethink the way that we were doing this. We started honing in on what was working, what wasn't working, and then did a lot of adjustments.
Yeah. We've had outposts in our game for some time. You know, when we started to hear from an art side for what the design requirements were going to be, fundamentally thinking about these as modules, thinking about them as thematic modules and, you know, very specific, then, you know, already like the mind was going of like, okay, we're going to need a kind of like a paradigm shift in terms of how we visually present these. You know, what could these settlements kind of feel like? And, you know, as with everything with outposts, it's you know, it's a gameplay or it's a location archetype. It's the smallest, probably one of the smallest location archetypes that we have. And then in time that will lead to like, you know, villages and towns and
yeah. Thinking about how we wanted to push this forward, I mean, Chris has always talked about putting outposts into players' hands. And so we needed to think about how would this expand? How would the players be able to make these homes feel, you know, homes or outposts or even businesses feel unique for the way that they want to play? And then there were even tools that we had to create in order to actually be able to embed these into the ground and make sure that it worked much better than what we did in Stanton, because with those we had to have them kind of on stilts and you know, just the points of contact were very limited for the ground.
Right. If I connect these modules together, how do we get something that doesn't feel like?
Well, I know that design, we came up, in particular Andreas and Dan came up with a long list of things, you know, okay, well, here's what we'll need in HABs, here's what we'll need, you know, for utilitarian, here's what we'll need for defenses, here's what we'll need for power and some oxygen, life support, so on and so forth. So there was a very long list, and then it's how can we take those and make them feel unified and visually unified together.
Yeah. Fundamentally, the thing that probably got us the most excited is finally we've started to think about these as like unified settlements, you know, base building. So as you can see on some of the concepts, we deliberately presented early exploration shots in this kind of like semi-isometric view to see, you know, how does it feel if I'm laying out my base? How would these modules kind of, you know, tie together? And you know, it kind of got the team excited, and finally we were thinking, all right, these settlements are going to be more than just like a single outpost, but more like a collection of modules. So just to continue on with the module building and the module creation, we can jump to Christian. And Christian can talk in a bit more detail about the visual development process we did for creating the exteriors of these new outposts.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the colonialism, and now I'm going to show you a little bit more about the modules. So the very first thing that we did was creating all the primitives and all the primitive shapes into 3D. So as you can see here, we have a lot of variety, right? There's the cubic coming in, there's the cylinder coming in, the spheres coming in. For example, if I take this building over here and I duplicate it and move it around, I could just simply grab some of the other ones and combine them together. And you will see later on that this is one of our archetypes, or one that we pretty much liked, right? So you can see here already there's a lot of variety of entrances, maybe some garages, maybe some smaller entrances for those NPCs or for the players, right? And if I zoom in, all of a sudden you can already see like how they react to the environment or the overall scale, right? So if I pan over here and you see these buildings on the back in the background, so you're always having a first-person standpoint or first-person view. So we were not only creating those entrances, but also smaller details and very briefly looking into the modules. So what you can see here is the very first concepts for the solar panels, for example, or the top-mounted, the roof-mounted solar panels. In the background, you see some other nice details that we can then just pick and put on our buildings, right? And some of the very last that we did is then pretty much those. So those were one of the archetypes. And you see, there are small buildings for housing or housing buildings. There are some building types that are more communal. We have some secondary and tertiary buildings, like those radio towers. If you imagine you're a colonist on a planet, right? There are multiple settlements on a planet. How would they communicate with each other? So we have kind of a radio tower, or some of those cooling devices. So if you imagine maybe there's something underground, there's an even bigger facility underground because you're on a very hostile planet environment. So you want to store your very sensitive data underground, and we were looking at those hints of life. Maybe you are a kind of a farmer. So you see already this is the first archetype. This is more cylindrical. There are some storage spaces coming in here and there. So where would you store your oxygen or your water, gases, for example? All of this is just a consideration from our side. Going over to the next one, this is more pyramidical. So we were looking at also again the same materials, or changing up the materials. So now it is again more concrete, and the color palette is changing. There are some of the storage coming in, and going then over to the next one, it is again looking at different materials. There's some storage buildings that are not in one big storage facility, but it's divided into smaller parts. So you have to walk around your settlement and see like, okay, I can put some stuff in here, but if I need something else, then I need to walk over there. And there is some playing around with some more entrances and windows. How do they react to the environment, right? So